Okay, in this portion, we're going to look at some of the holes of the skull. Let's look at some of the internal foramen. We do see a bunch of holes in here, right? So let's take a look at the cribriform plate. Where we have the cribriform plate, we have all those perforated holes. Those are called the olfactory foramen. Those are the olfactory foramen, and that's for cranial nerve number 1. Then we have Ross. We have ROS. We have foramen rotundum, ovale, and spinosum. Foramen rotundum, ovale, and spinosum. And I do have another slide here that shows, again, on the left-hand side, all the holes, all the foramen. And on the right-hand side are all the cranial nerves that go through it. There are 12 cranial nerves, right? Cranial nerve 1 through 12, but the way we refer to them are in Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then 12. It's kind of blocked. But 12 would be right there for the hypoglossal, going through the hypoglossal canal. Okay, so you can kind of refer back and forth to what structures go through these holes. So we have foramen rotundum, foramen ovale, foramen spinosum. And if we look here, cranial nerve 1, then the optic canal, cranial nerve 2, which is optic nerve. And then we have the superior orbital fissure, which we can't quite see in this picture, but I will show it. And the superior orbital fissure is going to go through the eye, and that's cranial nerve 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? So it's kind of going in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then foramen rotundum and foramen ovale is also cranial nerve 5 and cranial nerve 5. It's just that cranial nerve 5 is written this way, like a V, but there's 3 divisions to it, 1, 2, and 3. And that's because cranial nerve 5 is called the trigeminal nerve, and tri means 3. And it deals with the sensory to the 3 parts of the face, 1 going to the eyes, 1 going to the maxilla, to the upper jaw, and 1 going to the lower jaw. So it's called a trigeminal. This is the nerve when you go to the dentist and they want to work on your teeth to do a filling for a cavity, and half your face goes numb. It's the trigeminal nerve that they hit. So these are the names of the cranial nerves: cranial nerve 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So let's go back. So we have the olfactory foramen, those holes in the cribriform plate for cranial nerve 1. Then we have foramen rotundum, foramen ovale, foramen spinosum. And then here's the lacerum. Remember, lacerum means laceration. It is an abnormal, linear, knife-like slit. Here's the temporal bone. There are holes on the inside of the ear called the internal acoustic meatus. There's the large hole where the occiput is, the foramen magnum. On the inside of the foramen magnum of the occipital bone, there's the hypoglossal canals. And then right here, these large ones, kind of where the temporal bones and the occipital bones meet, there's a foramen, and that's called the jugular foramen. So these are really important holes that we can see from the inside of the skull. These are the cranial nerves that travel through them. And then again, the names of the cranial nerves, and you should know the 12 cranial nerves. There's a little silly mnemonic that you could do to remember them. It's O, 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 to touch and feel very good velvet ah, right? O, to touch and feel, very good velvet, ah. If you take the first letters of those, then it helps you kind of understand the order of the 12 cranial nerves and their names, okay? You don't have to know their functions just yet. The functions are going to come on our final exam when we do the brain and the cranial nerves. At least by then, you'll know the 12 cranial nerves because you have to know them for what goes through these holes, through the foramen. Okay, but you don't have to know their function. Now, when we look at the external part, here is the supraorbital foramen, here is the infraorbital foramen, and here's the mental foramen. And that's where cranial nerve 5, which is the trigeminal, that has V1, V2, and V3 travel through. So V1 comes through here, controlling the sensation to this part of your face. And then V2 is the trigeminal nerve going to the maxillary part of the face. And then out through the mental foramen is V3 controlling this part of the face. So when the dentist comes in and gives you lidocaine or novocaine and they numb the trigeminal nerve, half your face typically goes numb so they can work on you without feeling the pain. And your tongue, half your tongue also goes numb. Okay, so that's the importance of the supraorbital, infraorbital, and mental foramen is for the trigeminal nerve, cranial nerve number 5. In the orbit, there's a optic canal, and the optic canal is where cranial nerve 2, optic nerve, travels through. And then we have the superior orbital fissure, which is where we're going to have cranial nerve 3, 4, 6. Let's go back here. 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's going to go through the superior orbital fissure right there. So again, a fissure is not a foramen, right? It's more of an elongated slit. So there's a superior orbital fissure, and then there's an inferior orbital fissure. And again, they both are in the back of the eye orbit. All three of those are kind of like through the sphenoid bone, right? This is the sphenoid bone. Here's your nasal bone. Then you have the lacrimal, ethmoid, and sphenoid. So you have your optic canal, you have your superior orbital fissure and inferior orbital fissure. Vomer, perpendicular plate, middle nasal concha, inferior nasal concha. Now, when we look at the holes underneath the skull, right, we rotate it all the way on the bottom. We know that's your magnum foramen, right? You have your incisive foramen. These are the incisors, right? The teeth. Right here is the incisive foramen. Here's your carotid canal. Here's this very, very small one right here is the stylomastoid foramen. It's really, here's your styloid process. Here's your mastoid process. Let me change the color. Red is pretty bad. Here's your styloid process. Here's your mastoid process. And between the two is the stylomastoid foramen. Okay. Here, the visual, the reason why I brought this up here, this is showing the cranial nerve 5, trigeminal, but you can see the 3 divisions. Here's 1, here's 2, and here's 3. So here's the V1, which is the ophthalmic division. We have V2, which is the maxillary division. And then you have V3 going to the mandibular division. So the ophthalmic division goes through that supraorbital foramen. The maxillary division goes through the infraorbital foramen. And then the third division going to the mandible goes through the mental foramen, right? So that's going to be here, here, and here. V1, V2, and V3. The V again for trigeminal nerve, cranial nerve number 5, trigeminal nerve. Now on the side of the skull, not too much, just on the outside of the ear. Remember there was an internal acoustic meatus. There's also an external acoustic meatus. The internal one is on where the petrous portion of the temporal bone is. This is the external acoustic meatus where the sound waves penetrate through.